You have an idea of what you want to do, you have a vision, you have a strategy. Execute as quickly as possible to get data to prove or disprove. You can succeed in one of two ways. You fail fast, succeed fast, but the long slog is actually where it's the valley of despair, where it's just a long slog. You see a lot of these, default alive companies where you're at it for 10 years, but you're not growing that much. You're not really, but you're not running out of money either, but you can't raise another rounds. And you see that, but it would have been better if that company had just failed fast and they moved to the next idea.
Welcome to Tools for Tech Leaders. I'm Ian Tien, CEO and co-founder of Mattermost. Today's guest is Deb Liu, a product leader and former CEO who has spent her career building platforms used by billions, from payment systems at PayPal to Facebook Marketplace, and most recently, leading Ancestry as CEO. What's interesting about Deb's work is that it sits at the intersection of product, leadership, and scale, how ideas go from early concept inside large organizations to products that actually reach millions, even billions of users. Today, we're going to talk about what it takes to build and launch products inside big companies, how to navigate leadership as you scale, and how Deb is thinking about the next wave of technology, including AI. Deb, it's so great to have you.
It's great to be here.
All right. Well, I think Facebook Marketplace is something that is near and dear to everyone's hearts, and you've had this tremendous role in making that happen. Would love just to hear, the story on, how did it materialize and how did it finally work?
Well, the idea of Facebook Marketplace was something I had even before I actually joined Facebook. I talked about it in my interview. And at the time, I was interviewing for another job. So, I went in and started working on games and payments for many years, ended up working on ads, ad network, took over a platform. And every year I kept pitching the idea of doing Facebook Marketplace because I could see community commerce come to life. I was a mom. I was the only mom PM at the company for many, many years. And I just saw what was possible, where people are trading, I got like a scooter for my kids and then I sold it back when they outgrew it. And so I could just see this opportunity for community commerce. And so eventually I got the green light to start working on it. It took a couple years for it to really succeed, but now it's being used by over 1 billion people, including myself. Sold something on it a couple weeks ago. And so it's still a great place for people to really, everybody has that garage full of stuff. And if we just unleashed it, there's just less stuff that needs to be in the world.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, there's a lot of folks that are in large organizations or early stage organizations that, that want to put an idea out there. And it's not overnight success. Very often it's the V3, V4 that actually starts to work. And you have to endure that time of like all this stuff sort of falling apart and not quite being there and rebuilding. What was that like for Facebook Marketplace? Like, how did you last the multiple years that it took before it actually started to take off in a very scaled way?
Well, I think part of the challenge was that, it's in every marketplace, it's a buyer and seller ladder, right? You need to get buyers, you need to get sellers, you need to get supply and demand has to be right. And when it's off kilter, the whole system falls apart. And so local density mattered a lot, identity, trust, like we just had built out so many things. And again, the company was not a commerce company at the time. And so we were building out a lot of the tools and from scratch. And, but it was really incredible to see it when it finally hit, when, people came and they said, we started hearing people say, this is the reason I'm still on Facebook, which was really incredible because, it turned something that was really great, like being able to share your best moments with your families and friends and, follow businesses and have conversations in groups to something where you could also do something locally, physically with your community.
And how do you think about how do you know that you're right? There's this concept, there's a lot of talk in AI right now about product taste. And it's like, well, how do you know if you've got it or not, or it's just like a hallucination? Like, how do you have that sort of conviction and confidence? How do you bring people when the metrics might not be saying, all the right things? Like, how do you actually have that conviction?
Well, so much of it is judgment, right? It's a judgment of knowing. This is why AI can't replace humans, because so much, it's like, if you had asked AI many years ago, it's like, could you have a local delivery service for groceries? It would have said, well, all history says that Webvan lost billions of dollars. So therefore, no. but it's looking backwards, right? Maybe it's a different time. Maybe it's a different execution. Maybe it's a different team. And so often we kind of look at history and we say, okay, like this is what didn't work, when actually conditions are constantly changing. Every recipe, as you make something, you're tweaking different things, and it could be great or it could be terrible. A small change, like accidentally, and I've done this, replacing the salt and bread with sugar on accident could ruin the entire thing, right? And so really thinking hard about what it is that makes you successful. Why this, why now, and why this team, and why here? And having a clear articulation of your strategy, but also have a testing plan to test your assumptions. Because so often you go blindly, we see people say, well, I vibe coded this app, but nobody uses it. Well, did you talk to the people who actually need it? Have you sat down and had a conversation around what it is that's possible and what's the problem you're trying to solve? And I think that when you understand and you fall in love with the problem, then you can find the solution.
And how do you, just a double click, like one level down, like, did you do that yourself? Did you delegate it? How did you get people to do the right sort of research? Like, how'd you start when you were sort of early versus when you're more mature, and keep that cycle going of continuous discovery, continuous validation?
Well, so I had a day job. I had a different job doing something else, but I had a group of people around me who also believed in this vision, because these are the people who did research when they had extra budget. They would say, hey, let's just do a little bit of research on this beyond the work that we were doing. And so often Skunkworks projects just require a kind of its own momentum. How do you get people to come along? How do you get people to help you? How do you drive things forward? I think that those are all incredibly important parts of what we can accomplish.
And Facebook Marketplace was remarkable because like there was kind of an incumbent that we all used sort of before it happened. And then there's been so many efforts to like displace and then to be that new marketplace. It's a two-sided market. Was there anything that's specific on like, is there like an observation or a capability that made Facebook Marketplace work when so many other things didn't work?
Well, so for example, I was a big user of Craigslist. But the thing I hated about it the most was the anonymity. You were going to meet up with somebody in a parking lot that only have their email and it's not their real email. Like, how can you, trust is so important, right? And so, by the way, I rented an apartment, 2 apartments from Craigslist. I bought my exercise machine, which I still have from Craigslist. So I use that product quite a bit. But I felt like the anonymity was the biggest weakness. Because it would end, the second biggest weakness is location. Because you can only do it by city, you couldn't do it by actual physical location because it was a website. You had to have concentration. So you couldn't be in some town in the middle of nowhere and know your neighbors because they just didn't have enough cities for you and the density was too low. And so you could only have it in big cities and kind of suburbs that were big enough. And so those two, if you solve the problem that you hate about another product, even if you love that product, you can actually, Craigslist is still around and I still think it's very, very healthy. And it's because it serves a need. But I felt like for real trust, to build real trust, if you had real identity, Ian has been on the site and has had an account for 10 years. He's not going to scam you in that he's not going to blow his 10-year-old account to scam you for, $20, right? And say, or you share this group, or you live in the same city, or what are the things you have in common? I think that often, trust signals is this a real person and do they live around me? And so on, Craigslist and other tools, you're just not sure. And so we kept it with real names, real identity because of that, because it was the most important thing. And then location, because so many people use Facebook, it is like location density, especially on mobile, was very, very high. So even if you live, I have driven through, like we drove through West Virginia and we stopped someplace and I looked on Facebook Marketplace to see what was available. And I had a friend who said she did that. She actually was going through Virginia and she bought a baby doll stroller. And she said, yeah, we're just driving through and I saw it on and then we got off the exit and we bought it. And I was like, what? Because she's like, I just want to tell you, I bought this. And she lives here in the Bay Area. So the point is that like density of location and density of supply is super important, and the density of buyers. And I think that was something which we brought to the table.
That totally makes sense when you put it that way. I'm like, Craigslist is sort of like, I'm surprised like there hasn't been more like weird things that have happened on Craigslist because it's complete strangers, complete anonymity. So it's like when you look back, like, okay, that totally makes sense.
Well, it also didn't have ratings and reviews. So somebody could list 20 things, have great experiences, and somebody could have scammed 20 people that you don't know. So ratings and reviews, feedback from real people is also really important as well.
Yeah, 100%. And what were the hardest decisions, like the product decisions you had to make where you're like, it could go either way, there's really good arguments both sides? What were they, and how do you make those decisions?
Well, one of the biggest issues was we had was actually, do we keep it in groups or not? Right? How much were we actually, because a lot of groups had formed over the years, but if you couldn't find the group for your area or you weren't let in, then you just didn't have access. And so one of the things we did was, should we build a marketplace tab liquidity in a marketplace tab or not? And so in order to build that, though, we had to actually, have groups break down some of their walls. And so how do we do that? And so there was just a lot of those types of decisions. There's also, we get the question, and even to this day, people ask, why didn't you build a marketplace app? But part of what makes it great is that you're on Facebook doing other things, and then you check out what's available around you, right? And so it's really the ability to just commerce is happening around you, but you're also seeing what events are around you. What are the things your friends are doing? What are your groups doing? And so we see it as, for a long time, we just saw it as an extension of the kinds of utility and value you can create.
And if you're just to kind of, teach us sort of product management 101 and sort of break it down in terms of, okay, you're going to make these sort of large decisions. How much do you weight sort of split testing, prototyping, research, sort of strategic thinking, just pure vision? There's sort of opposite ends sometimes. Sometimes I see people incredibly, they won't do anything without a piece of data, which, local maxima leads them kind of spiraling. And then you have vision, which can also be hallucination. And they're like, we're going to go build this thing that nobody wants. And many startups, hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into vision that was a little bit maybe early for its time. But those two sort of, goalposts and how do you, or there are more sort of vectors, how do you think about, how would you teach someone to make these hard product decisions and what sort of tools in the kit to consider or use?
Well, I think one of the things is have conviction lightly held, strong conviction lightly held. You have an idea of what you want to do, you have a vision, you have a strategy. Execute as quickly as possible to get data to prove or disprove. You can succeed in one of two ways. You fail fast, succeed fast, but the long slog is actually where it's the valley of despair, where it's just a long slog. You see a lot of these, default alive companies where you're at it for 10 years. But you're not growing that much. You're not really, but you're not running out of money either, but you can't raise another rounds. And you see that, but it would have been better if that company had just failed fast and they moved to the next idea, right? Or that they took off. And I think often we kind of have this long slog problem. And the same thing is true of product teams. It's if we just have one more piece of data, we're one piece of data away from success. But how often does that really happen? That you're going to get that magical piece of data that's going to give you direction. Instead, test quickly, figure out what the answer is, and then move on.
That's awesome. It's very, for Silicon Valley, it's very, it's super relevant. And it's funny because on the one side, you have folks that, it's hey, this isn't worth your time. You should go to something else. And then there's other investors who, I remember one, I was asking another sort of person that was on the show, was just what's one of the things that are surprising people to understand? It's that it takes a decade to make a great company. And, very often the companies are sort of slogging it out, despite it all, default, and maybe it's, I don't know if it's LinkedIn or Reddit or, there's all those sort of valley of despairs. And, when you think about that in the macro, it kind of comes back to that same question about judgments. How do you know you're right? How do you know when it's time to slog it out? How do you know, if it's time to just, hey, go on, shut it down, or persist no matter what? And it's sort of, and it just feels like one of those really hard decisions. And have you seen that? How would you approach that? How have you approached it?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, if you have conviction that this is the right problem you want to solve, then you keep at it until you can solve it. But often I think people aren't even sure, what problem are we trying to solve in the world, right? Because they were I want to build X. Or often I meet and founders are I want to found a company. And I'm great, but in what space, right? What is the actual thing that you want to solve in the world? And are you doing that every single day?
Yeah, 100%. Are there examples where you've seen either yourself or other people, they just have this massive conviction? You talked about, lightly held, strong conviction. Have you seen someone that's just just was so hell-bent on something and they got it wrong? And sort of what does that feel like? And is there any way to kind of pull out or figure it out, before, wasting 5 years on it?
Well, like for example, I think like there was a time Zillow was buying houses, right, and reselling them. But that was a time when interest rates were like 2%, 3%. And the market changed on them, right? And then housing prices went up too high too quickly and capital dried up. So, you look at the organizations where is there a there there? Yes, but is it suited to their model? I think they were kind of an asset light, like a marketplace where they were connecting, agents and buyers. And to moving into a capital heavy industry is hard, right? And it was like you're carrying and you're actually at the fixing houses. You're doing something completely different than your DNA. And it doesn't mean it couldn't be successful. It just means that you have to really change out so many things at the same time. And I think often when companies go from one product line to two, they often stumble because it's like, it's orthogonal to the thing that they know the best. And so companies that start with a specific DNA get better and better at that one thing. And then it becomes harder and harder for them to do something else.
Yeah, 100%. And on marketplaces, you're kind of a world expert. At the same time, like how much would you do it again? Would you say marketplace is a thing because of network effects and and sort of greatness and barriers to entry, or is that really just you were passionate about this one problem? It's not the category. And how do you think about marketplaces as an opportunity? Do you see it as like huge, everyone's going there, or you're like, nope, that was just I really wanted to do this one thing, somewhere in between?
So I advise a number of marketplaces. I actually think that it's very enduring if you get it right. If you can match buyers and sellers, you can build trust. You can build basically the fundamentals, dispute resolution, customer service, because that's the biggest issue between especially human to human marketplaces or even business to human. It's, are you able to intermediate in such a way that you're adding value and matching both supply and demand? And I think that that's a very enduring model. What's made me a little sad is that right now VC money is not going there. I actually think AI could make a lot of marketplaces that were previously not buildable even more able to be built today. But I think that will take time.
Oh, that's super interesting. It feels like marketplace are something that's not going to be disrupted by AI because it's still human transactions. Are there sort of like, if you were a VC, like, is there a thesis you'd have about marketplace today, unmet needs? Like, how come there's not like 100 startups in this category?
Well, I think that there's I meet marketplace founders all the time who ask for advice, and there's so many interesting ideas. It's like someone who has a passion for one wedge, you just have to nail it. And so I'm agnostic when I talk to these founders. I'm just like, do you have enough? Is it big enough? Is it worth it? So Jeff Bezos started with books, right? It doesn't mean that books was where he ended up. He ended up in a much different place, right? And so having a very clear understanding of what you're trying to build and what makes your thing unique is really, really important.
Can you say that about one wedge? Is that like a wood splitting analogy? Sorry, I'm just super curious.
I think that it's like you have to just kind of like you have to have it's like with a lever, right? You can get more leverage if you have a thing that you have. What is your superpower, right? What is your wedge in, and what is your right to win? So we often talked about right to win. Like, what makes you uniquely right to solve this problem?
And for founders, do you find that is that from their background? Is that from their passion? Is that a mix? Is that experience? Like, what was your right to win?
Well, I think that, but mostly it's really like your passion and your ability to see the strategy. And, and there's a lot of like things that, people couldn't even imagine that people have built. So it's like, who thought that it's renting out a spare room could be, hundreds of billions of dollars. And yet, it's something really, really, it wasn't like Couchsurfer wasn't there first, right? Or and other companies or VRBO, but having like a very clear vision of why you think you're going to win and what makes you different, it's really critical.
Very cool. And then, when you think about marketplaces, like if you just had to sum up, this is how you should think strategically about them. What would be, if you kind of consolidate down, is there sort of like, you have like rules of marketplaces? Are there's a certain structure you want to see? Like, how'd you sort of advise folks, hey, if you want to think about marketplace categories, think about it like this?
Well, I think that it's really about, do you have an unfair advantage either in supply or demand? Right? What is the thing that you have that no one else has? Access to, supply. So basically suppliers that do X. or demand, the buyers who are looking for X, like, how to harness them. Whatever that is, you have to start with something that you are going to build on, because with the marketplace, you're starting with one side and then you're going up the next side and the next side. And so it's laddering up over time, and you grow because you have, your buyers are there. So the suppliers come, or the suppliers there and the buyers come because you help them discover it. And then you get more suppliers because the buyers are there, and vice versa. And so you really have to have a plan to match supply and demand, so that when people get there, it's kind of like if Uber didn't have enough drivers and every time you open the app, it takes an hour, you wouldn't use it, right? But so they needed enough drivers who are idling close enough to you before, and then they needed a demand because the drivers aren't just going to sit there and wait. And so it's really a delicate balance for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when you think about like the real-time marketplaces that you have to all put together. I feel like there's got to be a lot more, tech and laws behind that these days.
Yeah.
So marketplaces and being a product leader, and then becoming a CEO. CEOs come from different backgrounds: the finance, the sales, the go-to-market, the product. What's it like going from product to becoming CEO? What was going through your head when you made that change? How did it feel? What fit really well? What was like, this is so weird, I got to learn it. Like, what was it like going from product to CEO?
Well, so I was a product group lead, so I was kind of like a GM, but I think the shift is that often when you're in a horizontal, you run a team, like you're the GM or you're the leader of a space, you make a lot of decisions within your realm, but there's so many things that just work for you. Like they just automatically work. And I'll give you an example. It's like, which days you take off for vacation. What our in-office hours are going to be, and this was during COVID, like what is our masking and vaccine policy? Like there were just so many things that came along that like were not, even on your radar. It's just often you work within an organization and so many things are just on autopilot. And so suddenly a lot of decisions that were previously not, in your realm are now in your wheelhouse. And suddenly, the buck stops here. You take accountability for that. And so I think that was the biggest change, but it was also a really amazing experience. Like Ancestry is a wonderful company. It's been around for 40 years and it's done so much for people discovering their backgrounds. And so I really had an amazing time. I was there for 4 years and, I loved it. I loved every minute.
That's awesome. It's funny, like the CEO job is just got different perspectives. I had an engineering friend go to me, and I was at the early days of the company. I was same as you. I was like, I have to deal with insurance, and there's a payroll thing I have to select. And the engineer said, "Yes, but isn't that the job of the non-technical co-founder?"
That's right.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, okay, that's how the engineers view the CEO job. It's so of those things, and for me, it's like it's this. Another person described it as like your job is take the hardest problem at the company and work on it in priority order until it's time to go home. So
that's a good way of hitting it for sure.
That was actually Mark Leslie from GSB. So he's just got a lot of great one-liners, and it's so when you think about that, I deal with like everything I do, I have to manage literally for other than sort of like some areas in product engineering. It's like, well, like the people you hire are like way better at you at the finance and accounting of the HR, all these other things, and they're looking to you when like they don't know what to do, and they're the top of their area. And I don't know if you feel, and how do you approach that? They're like, okay, wait, now this is the person that's 15 years of expertise and doesn't know what to do. And now your job is to solve that like all the time.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One is, a lot of people, when you're so we have an expertise-based industry. So tech is a very expertise-based industry. The best engineer often becomes the tech lead, who then becomes, the manager. The best, designer is now the design manager, the design director, and so on and so forth. But the skill set is totally different, by the way. The skill set to manage, the skill set to manage managers, the skill set to manage an org and culture is very different. But often we take our experts and we bring them up the ladder because that's how it works, right? You're the very best at what you do. And so you should teach other people to do it. But by the way, not everybody who's very good at a craft is good at teaching that craft. So that said, the same thing is true a lot of times when, a lot of people tell me, well, I've asked people to take on teams, for example, and they're like, well, I don't know, there was one person I asked to take on a team and she said, well, I can't do the job of everyone on that team because it's beyond my skills. So I can't manage them. And I thought that's very limiting, right? Because you can never, you can't be better than every single person on your team at something. You actually have to be better at coaching and picking them instead. And it's like a totally different mindset, right? If you pick an amazing CFO and you coach them, then they're going to be the best that they can be, but they are still the expert. Your job is to, you're the conductor of the orchestra, not the best violinist. And those are different. The first violin is totally different than the conductor of the orchestra. And I think people forget that, right? It's like you don't have to play every instrument better than everybody else there. You have to know when that person is doing the right thing. And that's like, it's a listening ear. It's understanding the beat. It's reading the music. It's something totally different than playing better than them. And I think one thing that we mistake is that as we grow in our careers, we think that we have to be better than everybody who reports to us, when actually your job is to unleash them so they're better than you.
That's amazing. I love that. I love that you don't have to be the best violinist. You have to be the conductor. And I think as you build organizations and you're promoting people and you're bringing on new leaders, how do you so completely agree. How do you get them to be great at that being that conductor, about coaching, about hiring, about picking? Is that managerial training? Is that like you have infrastructure where you go? Are there like books you send them to? Are there boot camps? Are you just like, hey, let me spend 3 hours and teach you how to be a manager? Like, how do you so you find the potential? How do you unlock it?
Well, a lot of it is, coaching, right? The first thing about transitioning someone from an IC to a manager is you go from doing to leading through somebody else. And that is a hard transition. And I went through a really hard transition. When I first was a product manager, my manager asked me to hire a couple APMs and teach them. And I went back to him and I said, I could do their job in like a day a week. It takes me forever to teach them how to do this. And he's like, yes, but you're never going to scale. And if you can't scale, you can't grow. And so he was very patient. He taught me how to be a manager, which was how do you lead through others by training them up to be better and better and better than you. And so it's really a mentality. I think often, the best ICs are not necessarily the best managers. The best managers aren't the best directors, and so on and so forth, right? And so I think it's really teaching people to be adaptable and learn that skill set.
So maybe a loaded question. Both of us went to business school, but shouldn't that can you just get them to have a degree, or just put them yes, teaching them is great, right? But it's very one-on-one. It's very time intensive. Can you just load them up? It's here's Kubernetes, here's a book, right? Here's management training,
Well, this is why they require people in business school to actually have a job for a couple of years first, so that you know something about business. The challenge is that, some of these things, it's on the job training. This is an apprenticeship. It's not you read this book and suddenly you're an amazing manager, right? There's not a class for that. In fact, I think that the most important thing about being a manager is real-time feedback. How do you actually say, hey, at that meeting when you showed up, you were, and I've done this where I've asked people, can I video you while we're doing in this meeting? And then I've shown it to them. And I've asked them, how do you think you showed up? And so, really giving people feedback. There was one person who, when he was thinking, he would have this look on his face that he looked really unhappy. And I took a picture of him at every meeting and I sent it to him afterwards. And I said, you look really unhappy. And he just had no idea that was his thinking face, but it was actually freaking his team out, because they were like, he's super unhappy with us. He's going to fire us. This project's going to get killed. And I was like, I don't think he's unhappy, but I'd worked with him for a long time. The point is, it's really important that you nail each person's thing that they're trying to learn is not from a book. It's actually what's happening on a day-to-day basis.
I love that. I'll say next week my leadership team is going to get weird, but I think this will be it'll be really fun.
Yes, definitely.
What is sort of like a manager that gives sort of like a B+ in terms of feedback, and what's an A? So is it when you're seeing these things in the meetings, you're recording them, is that there's these 10 things you're looking for, and there's this one problem, and you're going to fix it this way? Is it sort of like the whole how do you know what to sort of focus on? There's probably got to be so many things, and how do you spend your time? And how do you have not just your capacity, but that person's capacity to sort of grow and change? What does a B+ manager look like in terms of coaching development? And what does an A look like?
Well, so, an A manager is somebody who thinks about, who is this person in 2 years and how do I get them there? Right? They're looking to the future, not just do I solve this problem today, but am I changing the arc and trajectory of this person's career? with the feedback I'm giving them. And I think that often, if you don't think about it, it's like, let's solve this problem today, but it's not going to solve the problem tomorrow. And so you're training and coaching, and but you're also learning from them too. So what is causing this to happen? What is it that we can correct? But what's going well too? I think too often we forget to praise, and there's too much correction. One of the things is to help people lean into their strengths. If they're really good at something, give them more opportunity to do that. Often it's like corrective only, and I think that that's the wrong way to go about it. Give people more opportunities, give them stretch assignments, see where they go. And, maybe it doesn't work out, but it gives you an opportunity to see them in practice in a different way.
Yep, 100%. And maybe just on the opposite side, when do you sort of call it and it's like not going to work out? And like, you know what? Like, this is just not going to be the right culture environment or role for this person. Maybe it's someone's got promoted as a manager and really needs to go back to IC, other sort of configurations, like, similar to that judgment on product. Like, how do you do that with like your teams?
Well, one of the things that I really, really loved about working at Facebook was that they let people decide to become a manager, but they also let them go back to IC with no penalty. So in a lot of companies, it's a one-way door, right? You go through, you become a manager, you fail, you just leave. But they're like, we have a lot of great people who would still be great IC. So they allowed you to move back and forth. And I appreciate that. And I think often, if you give a stretch assignment to, say, somebody on your team, your head of operations, and it doesn't work out, do you fire them? No, you say, hey, that didn't work out, and here's why, and let's think about what happened, right? And so I think often creating a safe space for people to take risks is one of the key parts of the job. Because otherwise people are really afraid to stretch themselves, and then they're not growing nearly as fast.
Yep, totally makes sense. And when you think about that in the macro, just kind of taking a step back, and how do you think about like organizational-wide career progression? So as you give one person opportunity, well, other people maybe not are like that opportunity. There's only so many of those, and there's only so much time you can focus. So how do you think about, like, as an organization progressing it forward? There's many different philosophies. Some things are more time bound, some things are more organic. Like, do you have sort of principles that you've picked up over time on how do you build the careers of an organization and team?
Well, I think that I think, first of all, it's really important that you think about kind of what does the shape of your team look like? What is the shape of your organization? You might have the most brilliant person, but not have a role for them. And so, that's not right for your organization at this time. It doesn't mean that they're not great at what they do. And often finding them a different role might be, they might, sometimes, like, I've had a situation where two people were ready to become the head of the team, but there's only one spot. Do you help the other person find the role that they're looking for? Maybe they don't want to work for each other. And so it's really important that you understand the dynamics of that. But more than that is you're doing both right by the person and by the organization. Ultimately, like, are you serving your customers, and what is going to be the answer that's going to serve your customers the best in the long term?
Yep, 100%. And maybe one last question on careers, like, there's folks that hit the acceleration point and are and just great projects, and they go forward. What about those other folks that they're got the heart in the right place, but for a reason the project's canceled, or it's it doesn't sort of work out? How do you think about that in terms of performance reviews, ratings, and compensation rewards? How do you think about, like, the folks that did win but maybe they got lucky versus the ones that did all the right things but maybe were a little less lucky?
Well, so I think that this is an organizational bias that happens a lot, and it happens very quietly. It's a fundamental attribution error, which is people who are like you and think like you, if they fail, it's because of external factors. But if they think really differently than you, and they have a totally different perspective and they take a risk, if they fail, it's because of their decisions. Like, I've seen this happen over and over again. It's a very dangerous place to be. And so one of the things I encourage people to do is think about, what was the contribution? What did you learn from this experience? Is there another role that's right for this person? Rather than just saying, well, because let's say, look, anybody who goes on a new initiative, 50% of new initiatives fail. Okay. And let's just say that that's pretty good, actually, at a company, right? It's at a larger company. So basically, does that mean that the 50% who opted for those opportunities are just terrible by definition, and then the 50 that succeeded were great by definition? Or do you understand what it is that happened and really deconstruct what happened so that you understand it? I think that that's a really important part of what we can do.
Yeah, 100%. It sounds like you're working in a new space right now with AI. I'd love just to get, your how you're thinking about the sort of frontier of AI that's changing. I'm sure by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be all different. It's such an incredible speed. And what are the opportunities that you're looking at that you're excited about?
Well, so we just started this company just a few months ago, and we're really helping companies really think through their AI strategy and how to bring AI in the right way. Often companies are like, well, we have ChatGPT, we're all good, or our engineers use Claude Code, but actually AI can do so many different things if you really understand the capabilities. So often we come in and we help companies really think, what does it look like to have an agentified version of our company? What if we were really starting? And so we work with CEOs and C-suite executives to say, let's look at our strategy across the board. We often partner with like AI strategists, within the organization, but often those people have a day job too. And so, but they're not rethinking, okay, if we were starting from scratch today, what would we do differently? What are the areas of augmentation? What is the strategy that we need to, and then we actually work with them. We actually are their AI engineering team, and we help build some of these workflows and maintain it for them. And now that they see the results and the benefits, then they can grow as well. And these organizations are able to see, there's like 20, 30, 40% of someone's job that's like, should be agentified so that they can spend the rest of it doing what only humans can do. And often you create this kind of weird dynamic where it's like you're spending a lot of time doing things that are low value, and you're not spending time with customers, renegotiating contracts, things that human creativity is required for. And so we kind of help take down take away the 20, 30% of the jobs that are, of someone's job that doesn't make sense, and then free them up to do the things that will actually grow the organization.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like there's this incredible demand for that. I talked to a lot of CEOs, and it's this weird thing because I always thought that everyone would just be like, of course we want to use AI, but there's so much change management and resistance and confusion and anxiety. So it's it's a pretty, I'm sure there's a ton of demand for this, for that transformation. We just had, last podcast, we had Charlene Lee, who's got a book on this, and she had a great quote, which was, the fastest cars have the strongest brakes. And it was about, you want to move fast, you actually have to have AI governance and controls sort of in place as you kind of go fast. What are you seeing in terms of having the right, just the right, do you think that it's about sort of a right level of control? Do you feel like, no, we actually have to have a whole, big, robust layer? What are you seeing from the market and the folks that you're talking to about like the controls in that sort of AI transformation?
Well, so I think first, a lot of times, and we did this in Ancestry, we had kind of a responsible AI document where it's like, how do you use it? What data can you put in it? And those types of things. And I think it's important to have guardrails. But it's also important not just to tell people what to do, but to build those guardrails into your tools. So that you don't accidentally make mistakes, right? You see every day someone's like, I used OpenClaw, deleted all my emails. Like today, it's like, we deleted our entire production database. I'm like, how does that even work, right? You didn't quarantine it. Like you didn't think about, I think that often you don't understand, if you don't understand what the technology can do, it could actually accidentally do things that you did not plan on. And so a lot of organizations are like excited to experiment, but you have to experiment within a box, right? It's like before you take it to production, actually like test it, really understand it, have engineers review it, have them like recode it if necessary, secure it. I think a lot of people are just like, let's just put it out there and see what happens. But it's very dangerous right now because there isn't, it's a black box to a lot of people. And so you don't know what's in it. And I think it's really important that especially, CEOs or C-suite executives really think about what we do is we actually say, okay, if we were identifying your organization, what is the strategy we would take to get there? And what are the pieces and parts? And we do that, you can do that relatively quickly. We're not talking about a 9-month project. We're talking about in like 2 or 3 weeks, just really understanding what the organization does before you just jump right in. And then once you jump in, it's like, pick one thing and then show the organization what's possible. Because often you also see this problem where people just jump in and then they're like, oh, it failed. AI is dead. Like, we can't use it. And I'm like, no, I mean, how much experimentation does it take to get this right? And so it's both the what and the how. We work on both the what, which is what should you be doing, but also the how you should do it, because that's what, Charlene is talking about. If you do it wrong, you can, go completely sideways. I think that, it's still early days. Imagine we're 3 years after ChatGPT came out in general, just general usage, right? Think about 3 years after the internet came out. That was 1998. Think about what companies hadn't been started yet or just were in their infancy. Think about, what companies were thinking about then and what happened in the next 10 years. We are still super early days in trying to figure out where this is going to go. And I think a lot of organizations have a lot of questions. And that's what we do is we work with, CEOs and C-suite to really think about those questions, the hard questions. But then also a lot of times we meet a lot of people who are amazing consultants, but then they give a great, presentation to the executives, but the execution is what's missing. And so often we also act as the execution arm. We actually sit down and help really build the workflow, show what's possible, break it down, show you how the agents work, all the skills, and then we actually host it, secure it, and actually, implement it as well.
That's pretty awesome. It's wow. We are in the 1998 of AI. That's kind of crazy.
I like that phrase. So, I talk a lot about it. Everyone's like, well, AI's here, everybody's using it. And I was like, think about where the internet was, 1998. Think about 3 years after mobile phone, the smartphone came out, what people were doing then.
Yes, 100%. Wow. Very much with you. Maybe one last question before the rapid fire is when you think about combining those two pieces of experience, sort of the AI piece and then product leadership, what are the things that are just you're never going to look back as a product leader? And if you're not doing them today, it's it's okay, right? You got a little bit of time, but hey, it's only 1998. But what are the forever things that you just feel like people aren't going to go back to once they start using things in a foundational way?
Well, so here's the thing that I really think about, which is, there was a time when it was big eat slow, right? People were rolling up companies and vertical integration. Then there was a period of disruptors, right? Small eats fast. Small eats big, right? So these disruptors come along. They're these small companies are became really big. They disrupted these traditional enterprises with tech. And then now I think it's going to be fast eat slow, which is the companies that figure this out fastest will win more market share. They'll be able to execute faster. They'll be able to reinvest in their business more. And that's where I think the biggest opportunity is companies that have no regrets are the ones who are going to figure this out and figure it out fast, but in a really responsible way.
Yep, 100%. All right, would love to move to rapid fire, just quick questions, whatever is off the top of your head. So maybe a product principle you come back to often.
Build for the customer, not for yourself.
Oh, 100%. A mistake product leaders repeat.
Always believing they're right and holding on to their convictions too long.
Oh, yes. A career decision that changed your trajectory.
Joining tech. I stumbled into PayPal when I was just graduating because I couldn't find another job.
All right. Well done. A book or idea that you recommend frequently?
Oh, man. I love the book Blitzscaling. It's kind of a way to, how do you build faster?
Yeah, great book. And last one thing people misunderstand about building products.
That it is, you overestimate what you could do in a short period of time and underestimate what you can do in a longer period of time. You think that it's going to be magical the first, 2 months. Now with AI, maybe that's changing, but things take time. It takes iteration, and that's important.
Yep, 100%. Deb, thank you so much. This was a really great conversation. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks so much for listening. If you like this content, please join our LinkedIn group. Please thumbs up, please comment, please subscribe. We'd love to bring more of this content to you.